So Nintendo had this huge hit with The Legend of Zelda back in the 80s, right? And they also had a lot of other hits, obviously. So Nintendo was on top of the world in the 80s. But they were also at the cutting edge of trying to develop handheld titles to take on the road with you. We all know how that started with the game Watch and Gunpei Yokoi. We'll come back to that later in the video. But what I wanted you to understand is how mind-blowing this was in the 80s. You wanted to take a video game with you? What? Well, see, as a kid, I was already one step ahead. I started developing my own portable Nintendo system. And it took me about 25 years, but I finally finished it. I present to you, viewer, the debut of my invention. Fuck a Game Boy. Game Boy? No, this is the Game Man. Ugh! Yeah. Super fucking awesome, man. 16-bit graphics. Fuck yeah. Legend of Zelda. Fuck yeah.
In all seriousness, Nintendo was on the cutting edge of mobile gaming. We've already touched on the first Zelda game that was ever portable in our Link's Awakening video in part 4. If you want more information on that, please head to our YouTube page and you'll be able to find it rather easily. But that wasn't even the first portable Zelda game, and we'll get back to that in a second, but there were quite a lot of portable Zelda games throughout the years. So many in fact that there's no way we can cover them all in one video. So we're going to break this up into at least 2 parts, and the first part is going to cover the majority of the handheld Zelda games before the Nintendo DS. Again, Link's Awakening's already been covered, so we won't touch on that one. Just to get it out of the way, yes, we are aware that The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2 were released on the Game Boy Advance. They are literally identical to their NES versions. Again, we've already talked about those, so if you'd like more information, please see our videos in the Zelda Retrospective Series. We're going to focus on the other games: Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, the Minish Cap, Four Swords Adventures. Yes, we know it's not portable, but we're not about to make a video for that game, so we're going to talk about it now. And finally, the obscure and relatively unknown Zelda Game & Watch. But let's get underway with our first games up for review, the Oracle games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons.
If you've been following the Zelda franchise, I'm sure by now it's apparent that there are a ton of Zelda games out for a number of different systems. But this hasn't always been the case. In fact, up until the release of Ocarina of Time, there were only 5 Zelda games: The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time. But right around the turn of the century, the Zelda franchise kicked into high gear, beginning to release games on a number of different platforms. And obviously, as a Zelda gamer, this was bliss. It all started with the Game Boy Color, with the release of 2 games that had an interlocking password system that if you beat both games, you'd be able to unlock different features in each game. These were the Oracle games, the Oracle of Ages and the Oracle of Seasons.
Released in 2001 for the Game Boy Color, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons are 2 Zelda games released on the same day by Nintendo, and they were developed by a company called Flagship, a subsidiary of Capcom. Yes, that Capcom. And no, Link will not be doing any but this game does borrow a lot of its gameplay from the earlier Game Boy and Game Boy Color game, Link's Awakening. These games are pseudo-twin games, but are completely separate titles in their own right. Ages is a game focused on 2 overworlds, one set in the present and one set in the past, while Seasons has 4 different overworlds, each representing a different season in the game. And this adds a very interesting appeal to both titles as they make you think outside the box in the overworld, similarly to how A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time operated. The games can link together, puns, using either a link cable or a password. The games play as separate games entirely. However, beating both games with the link enabled allows for a deeper story, more characters, and a special final boss, the likes of which I won't spoil for you since the games are available on the 3DS. The idea for a linked game was something Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to do after the enormous success Pokemon was experiencing at the time, but as he was busy with his own projects, he was unable to attempt a game. Capcom was actually interested in developing a remake on the Game Boy Color of the original NES title The Legend of Zelda, but Miyamoto wasn't sure of whether or not this was a good idea, as he was more interested in making new Zelda titles rather than rehashing old, and eventually he refused, which is ironic because he ended up re-releasing The Legend of Zelda anyways on the Game Boy Advance, but whatever. He counter-offered to allow Capcom to develop a trilogy of games a la Pokemon that would allow interactivity between the three games. Each game would be starring one of the three goddesses in Hylian forms, Nairu, Din, and Furore, in what he proposed as the Triforce series. However, once development started, the third game was cancelled due to development difficulties, so Furore's story will never be known. Ages takes place in Labrina, a sister country of Hyrule, where the Oracle of Ages Nairu lives. A wizard named Varan possesses her, and she plans on taking over the land using the past, which affects the future through her actions. Seasons is in a land called Holodrum, a sister country of the previously named two, and there, the Oracle of Seasons, Din, is kidnapped by Onyx. Link finds out that Varan and Onyx aren't the true villains of the game, but again, no spoilers here, thank you. Ages is a more puzzle-focused game, while Seasons is more action-packed, but both games feature puzzles and action throughout. The games are exactly like Link's Awakening, using much of the same music and graphics. However, these titles were developed solely for the Game Boy Color, therefore they are not backwards compatible with the Game Boy, Game Boy Pocket, or Super Game Boy. But they do feature something Link's Awakening had little of: fully vibrant and well-animated cutscenes in full color. The games are beautiful for Game Boy Color games, but the new music introduced is hit or miss in my opinion. Obviously, since the game is based on Link's Awakening, the control is wonderful. If you thought Link's Awakening controlled nicely, you'll enjoy playing this game, despite some of the really frustrating side quests and mini-games that are mandatory in this title. Collecting the rings gets really old, and that dumb Wild Tokay game, oh, don't get me started. Also, the formula of this game is rather predictable, and if you've played any of the previous 2D games, you kinda know what to expect. You know, beat bosses, collect items, fight the final boss, blah blah blah. But one cool thing these games do introduce is animal companions. You get 3 animal buddies, Ricky, Moosh, and Dimitri, to help you traverse the land, which is kinda cool even though you don't get Epona. You know, even though she's in the credits, I'm just saying. And yes, in Ages, this dude makes an appearance. Whatever. The best way to get the full experience is to play both titles, as the new items and characters make the stories worth the grind, and the combined stories of using both games is actually a pretty cool experience, and very unique in the Zelda franchise. Overall, these games are very well crafted, with dungeons that are at least on par with past 2D games, fun boss battles, and well-paced storytelling. I highly recommend these games despite their few flaws. If you want to try one of the two first, I recommend Seasons, as it's more similar to the original games, but really either title is a proper addition to the Zelda legacy and worth a play if you're a Zelda fan.
Those are the last Zelda games released on the Game Boy, as the Game Boy Advance came out a couple of years later and changed the handheld market. Unfortunately, Zelda was late to that party. Even though there were 4 Game Boy Advance Zelda titles released, 2 of them were complete remakes of NES titles in Zelda and Zelda 2, and another one was a re-release of A Link to the Past, with an added bonus game inside of it, 4 Swords.
Finally, in this entire video retrospective series, I've done nothing but praise the Zelda games. Even Zelda 2 was a decent game at the end of it all. But the level of quality and attention to detail in the Zelda series cannot be ignored. Every title up to this point was great, if not a masterpiece. But even Rome eventually fell. This game can kiss my motherfucking ass. I'm a nice man! Released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance, along with A Link to the Past, this was the first attempt by Nintendo to create a multiplayer Zelda experience. The first of a number of games that attempted this. And in my opinion, this is easily the worst of all 5, but let me get the good out of the way really fast. The graphics are pretty, the music is decent, and the controls are good. There, done. Oh, also, holy shit, you can play as 4 Links at the same time! Team up with your friends in Battle Body, because holy crap, multiplayer Zelda, oh my god! Okay, Nintendo, you suck for this game. Now, they did implement some creative puzzles that have to be solved by each player in the game, and kudos for them for that. The game is quite clever, and is actually decently fun in some parts if you actually get the chance to play it. They also did something new in that all the dungeons are randomly generated, meaning that each playthrough, yeah right, was different. But the game is quite easy in comparison to other Zelda games. This was the first title that, in my opinion, really held the player's hands too tightly, giving hints and tricks throughout the game. This doesn't sound so bad, you might be thinking. JSR, why do you hate this game so much? Well, let me tell you, sir or madam, you can't play this game by yourself. At all. Like every other Zelda game. Why would you make this game multiplayer only, and then make it so that each person needed not only a copy of the game, but a Game Boy Advance, and you needed Game Link cables? This is stupid! I was only able to experience this game using emulators, as I had 0 friends who bought this game for the Game Boys. And the biggest tease of all is if you make enough progress in Four Swords, you access a secret dungeon in A Link to the Past. But good luck with that! Despite it being short, it's not like it's a quick game of Madden or Street Fighter, it's still a Zelda game. You have to have enough time to actually play, and getting 3 friends with the game, a Game Boy Advance, and has the time to play it all? Man, you'd have an easier time getting through the Vault of Glass drunk, high, and blindfolded. Jesus. And even if you could get all your friends to play, the game was way too short, and all the maps are randomly generated, so it makes for a frustrating experience if you don't have the time to dedicate 3 or 4 hours with your friends on the game. It's honestly not worth it. Despite colorful graphics that were the base for the Minish cap later on, and pretty good controls, the co-op style just doesn't feel natural in a Zelda game, and you just get frustrated with your buddies that are supposed to be helping you out, because the game feels more like a competition. The stages rank each Link at the end on whoever collects the most rupees and treasures, so the co-op aspect just ends up going out the window, and it just becomes this big fuckfest of who can screw the other player over the most while still beating each level. And the puzzles, they're just gimmicky anyways. It's line up 4 links and press the block, step on 4 switches. So clever, oh my god. I give credit to Nintendo, as they at least made Four Swords an add-on to another game rather than a standalone game. But maybe putting the game in more than one game pack, or making it possible to play the game using only one game pack, would have made it easier to experience the game, despite it really not being worth it. The bosses were too easy, the game gave too many hints, so there was just little reason to cooperate with your buddies and try to figure out the weak points. Again, to be fair, this is actually a fun game with a friend for short periods if you can actually find one to play it with. It just doesn't feel like a Zelda game. It's a gimmick. It's a pure gimmick. If you really want to try this game, well, there was an anniversary edition released on the DSi as DSiWare, and it was free to download. Sounds great, right? Oh, and by the way, in that version, you could play 1 player. What a concept! But Nintendo took it down, and as of now, you can't even play that version. What the actual fuck? So you can either screw around with cheat codes on Game Sharks to try to access the game and mess around. You could try to get 4 copies of a game that's almost 15 years old with 4 Game Boy Advances that all work and 4 Game Link cables, or you could just say screw this and go buy Four Swords Adventures for the GameCube, which wasn't much better, and we'll come to that in a second. So in conclusion, while it was a good idea, this game is hampered by terrible decisions. It's just way too difficult to even try. The experience isn't worth the hassle. It's the first black mark in an otherwise pristine series to this point.
So basically, although I think the concept of Four Swords was actually quite clever, the game just wasn't worth it. The only reason this game was a success was because it was riding on the coattails of and was released alongside of A Link to the Past, one of the greatest Zelda games of all time. While I'm glad that people did get to experience it, not as many as Nintendo probably wanted. Honestly, it's just not really worth it. Luckily, the next entry in the Zelda franchise, well, after the Wind Waker of course, would redeem the Game Boy Advance. Funny enough, this is another entry where Capcom was involved. The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap.
I love the Minish cap so much, and yet I hate this game at the same time. Now hear me out, because if you're a fan of this title, you'll likely agree with and enjoy this review. The Minish Cap was released in 2004 in Japan and Europe, and 2005 in North America and Australia. Again, it was developed by Flagship and Capcom, and ended up taking an awful long time to finish, the title not releasing until mere weeks before the new Nintendo DS would launch. This hurt the title's sales, and it's unfortunate, as this title is a gorgeous and well-designed entry in the series. Ironically, Nintendo decided on this to prevent cannibalizing the Nintendo DS's sales in North America, which is funny because the DS sold very poorly for its first year or so in the market anyways, before exploding in popularity in late 2006, but that's another topic for another time. The timing and release, both in regards to the Game Boy Advance's life and the DS competing with it, is the biggest reason the Minish Cap's sales were hurt. The game takes place back in Hyrule, as Link and Zelda attend the 100-year Picori Festival together. A warrior named Vaati wins a contest, and Link is in charge of delivering his prize, a handcrafted blade forged by Link's grandfather. Vaati is allowed to touch the magical and sacred Picori blade, a mythical sword forged by the hidden Picori race, a bug-sized elfin people that, according to legend, gave the hero of time his green garments and his sword and shield. But Vaati shows his true colors and shatters the Picori blade, releasing the evil monsters within, and then petrifies Princess Zelda with a magical spell. Now, it is up to Link to solve the riddle of the Picori blade, restoring its former glory as the Four Sword and defeating Vaati. The Minish Cap's graphics are fantastic, as this title looks like it was a direct port of a late Super Nintendo title. Colorful sprites, awesome animations, and wonderful scenery make a lovely game experience, especially when Link uses the game's gimmick. The Minish Cap introduces the ability of Link to shrink to smaller than a mouse's size, thanks to his magical cap named Eslo. Eslo introduces Link to the Picori, whom are actually called the Minish, and he acts as Link's guide in the game, similar to Navi, Tattle, and the King of Red Lions in the previous games. Eslo is actually a wise and magical Minish who was transformed by Vaati, who has a connection with Eslo. I love Eslo. Remember, this game came before Twilight Princess, before we were introduced to Midna. Before this, Link's guides were always wise or kind, or in the case of Tattle, at least they weren't condescending to Link. But Eslo seems to love to pick on Link, constantly belittling him and making sarcastic comments, before eventually growing to like Link and the two become friends. It's very similar in Link's relationship that he has with Midna, and I applaud the writers for giving the central Cap a really great personality. Once again, as in all the Game Boy games, the usage of the shield as an equipable item rather than an always equipped item is a strange one that I really feel hurts the gameplay. But luckily, Link can do other actions while using the shield, so at least it's not as bad as the Oracle games in Link's Awakening. But why, Nintendo? Why? Other than that annoying thing, the controls are fantastic, and combat feels natural and fluid. But one thing that I don't like about this game is that it's pretty easy. Now, this is a trend that really has to stop with Zelda games. Ever since Four Swords, most Zelda games seem to be too easy. Yet I'm very grateful that Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD both had hero mode available from the get-go. Why does there have to be hero mode in the first place? Why are these games so friggin' easy nowadays? The old school games were not easy. Minish Cap is very easy. Minish Cap's soundtrack is very well done, but the obvious compression of the files is notable. On the original hardware, the music sounds amazing. But when you use a Game Boy player with a GameCube, or if you buy this game on the Wii U Virtual Console, it makes it painfully obvious that the game's soundtrack was held back by the Game Boy Advance's hardware limitations. Yet, the soundtrack is probably the best of all the early handheld titles. Considering how great Link's Awakening soundtrack is, that's really saying something. But where the Minish Cap really shows off is in its puzzles. Using this shrinking mechanic really adds a bit of freshness to both the dungeons and the overworld, making objects like puddles seem like bottomless oceans, raindrops become lethal obstacles, and everyday items like barrels become huge obstacles for Link to figure out. It adds a dimension not seen before or since in the franchise, and this really makes one of the weaker points stand out, as Minish Cap's dungeons are awesome, but there's only 6 of them. It makes for a really short game. and it's really disappointing because it's a good game. To make up for this, Capcom did something that pisses me off with video games, not just this one, but all games: filler content. They added 2 collection features to Minish Cap that make the frustrating gold Skulltulas of Ocarina of Time, or even the magical rings of the Oracle games, seem tame in comparison. Kinstones and mysterious shells. Now, the Kinstones aren't that bad, in that at least they're fun to find and fuse with people, and they help with the progression of the story. When you approach someone that wants to fuse, you'll see a small cloud pop up that will tell you can fuse. If you press the L button, you'll bring up a fusion screen. Now, sometimes this opens up new areas and uncovers secrets, and others, really more Kinstones. But these seashells, man oh man, first introduced in Link's Awakening. They were a welcome feature in that game. In that one, it was a small amount, they were easy to find, and you didn't have to find them all. But in this game, it's not even worth your time, bruh. All they do is unlock a phonograph so you can play the game's music, and you get a piece of heart. And if you're a completionist like I am, you will. And this horrible little bastard will make you pay hundreds of shells for just a chance to get a new figure. There's no guarantee. You'll get to the point where you have to save up hundreds of shells, play the lottery, you'll lose. So you shut the power off, turn it back on, get back to the shells, try again, you lose again, shut your power off, and keep doing this for an hour just to get one friggin' figure, or you can just give up and not care. Because see, I actually did this, and it was a waste of my fucking time. It literally took me years to do this when the game first came out. I still have my save file from all those years ago. But you couldn't pay me to do this again. Never again. Now, that being said, even with this title's flaws, which there aren't very many of, to be honest, if you enjoyed A Link to the Past, or any of the two-dimensional games, or if you just want to try a creative Zelda game, I do recommend this title over all of the other handheld games, save Link's Awakening and A Link Between Worlds. This is an excellent Zelda game, and it's available on both the Wii U Virtual Console and the original Game Boy Advance. It's quite possibly the most overlooked and underrated title in the entire franchise, and it is definitely worth a try, despite its short main story. Give it a shot. Eslo approves.
It really took the 2D formula of Zelda to another level. It's not the best 2D Zelda game of all time, but this game does the franchise proud and stands neck and neck with any 2D Zelda game. This is, in my opinion, the most underrated Zelda game. It wasn't perfect, it had flaws, but I'll recommend this game to any Zelda fan. If you're looking for a Zelda experience with great graphics, great sound, great control, a great story, a unique story, and very, very innovative gameplay, this is right up your alley. The next entry in the Zelda franchise, not so much. Now I know this isn't a portable game, but the reason we included it in this video, well, for one, it utilizes the Game Boy Advance as a controller, which is unique in itself. The other thing, you really want me to talk about this game for 20 minutes? There's not much to talk about, really. I'm not going to go on record and say I hate this game, because I don't. I think it's a decent game, but there's a reason this game didn't sell very well.
So, your Four Swords game didn't do so well with critics or gamers, did it? So what do you suppose Nintendo decided to do to make up for this? Well, you probably already guessed, but I'll put it in layman's terms. They remade it for the GameCube. Yay! The footage you're watching is from one of the unreleased Zelda-related titles in North America. Officially called Navi Trackers, we originally heard about this game when it was called Tetris Trackers. Using only your Game Boy Advance to see your screen as the TV only showed a map, up to 4 Game Boy Advances could connect with 4 GameCube GBA cords to play a scavenger hunt? Yeah, I'm not too sad this only came out in Japan. But believe it or not, this actually has more to do with the actual Four Swords Adventures gameplay than you might expect, because, spoiler alert, you still can't play multiplayer without Game Boy Advances and link cables.
not true. That's impossible.
Now, to Nintendo's credit, you can play single player in this game, and thank the fucking Hyrulean gods for this. This game is actually playable solo. This game was designed to allow for single player gameplay, which is what they should have done with Four Swords in the first place. So tell me, why did they implement the multiplayer in such an asinine way?
No! No!
Oh, Nintendo. I'm running out of adjectives for how much you can frustrate me. If I didn't love you, I'd fucking hate the shit out of you. This was a complete gimmick, and not worth it at all. While the single player gameplay is nice, and it's actually kind of fun, unless you absolutely have to try multiplayer Zelda, once again, it's not even worth the hassle. And this title is also 2D overhead, reminiscent of A Link to the Past, with really well designed graphics. 2D on the GameCube actually looks pretty good. When one of the links enters a cave or a house or a subscreen, it shows a small display for that player, which also would have been shown on his or her Game Boy Advance screen. It was a neat and creative way to implement the connectivity of the Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, I guess. But it's stupid that you have to use a Game Boy Advance instead of actually just using a goddamn GameCube controller. Oh, I need to calm down. You can use a controller for single player, but if you play two players, you have to use two Game Boy Advances. You can't even use a GameCube controller if you play multiplayer. Oh man. Why did they? It doesn't even make sense. Why couldn't they have just designed the game to work like, say, Turtles in Time or Gauntlet? Again, it's too difficult to actually get more than one person playing the game. And although this one is easier to get working than Four Swords, and probably more worth it, I guess, at least in the GBA Four Swords, it allowed access to a dungeon in A Link to the Past, so they dropped the ball on this whole fucking series! In my opinion. The game suffers from the exact same flaws as Four Swords. It's easy, it's short, the story sucks, and the multiplayer is a contest gimmick rather than co-op. The only difference is you collect Force Gems instead of rupees. Your biggest threat in this walkthrough of a game is fucking Tingle. Yes, Tingle. His only reason he exists in the game at all is to steal your Force Gems. He is an enemy in this game. That fairy asshat son of a pictograph dude is the most annoying enemy in this entire game because you can't even kill him. No, I'm getting angry, and I probably shouldn't. Because honestly, this is a decent game at best. It's almost borderline boring though. There's not much to talk about here. There is some cool things about it. I mean, you can control 4 links at a time if you play solo, so you can utilize the links for puzzle solving. Instead of only fighting Body, this time you also get to fight Dark Link and, spoiler alert, Ganondorf! Who would have guessed? The puzzles are gimmicky, the story's weak, the enemies are pansies, and the graphics, while nice for 2D graphics, they still can't compare to the beauty that is The Wind Waker, which came out a full year before this game. Now, there is a lot of fan service here, especially for fans of The Wind Waker and A Link to the Past, but it still feels as if it's a shoe-in gimmick instead of a fully fleshed out title. The entire game simply exists to showcase GBA connectivity to the GameCube. Nintendo even emphasized this point at E3 in 2003, when they announced it as one of the first games to showcase GBA connectivity.
In their own Game Boy Advance screens. Let's start off on the TV screen, which you see in the center here. So they're playing it all together on this single screen, and as you can see, as they move around, this camera zooms in and out.
As a result, it's not that good. Only die-hard Zelda fans should even think about getting this game to play. But if you can find 3 other die-hard Zelda buddies who have Game Boy Advances and link cables, it's a lot more fun than Four Swords was, for short bursts, but don't expect it to become habit-forming or replace your urge to actually play a real Zelda game. Now, Nintendo actually made this game canon in the timeline. It's in the child timeline, but who the hell even cares? The story sucks, it's all built to showcase a gimmick. If you're curious enough, you can't even find the game except on GameCube. As of this date, the only games that you cannot buy as re-releases are as follows: Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes, Hyrule Warriors and Hyrule Warriors Legends, and yep, you guessed it, Four Swords Adventures. I guess Nintendo learned the hard way that gimmicks don't always mean sales, huh?
So, you know, this could have been a really good game. It could have been. It was still a decent game. I'm not going to say it's bad. It's not. But there was so much potential here that, again, Nintendo just wanted to be a little too gimmicky, a little too innovative. You don't fix what's not broken. Zelda games, there's a reason there's a formula in place. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just got to add some bling to it. And, well, this could have been something great. Instead, it's just, it's okay. So, before we let the video conclude, there's one more handheld game that I wanted to talk about. And this is actually the first of the handheld Zelda games. Zelda. That's all it's called, just Zelda. No The Legend of, no Zelda 2, no Zelda Infinity, no Super Zelda, Zelda 64, Zelda Modern Warfare, Zelda Advanced Warfare, Zelda Ghosts, Zelda Ghosts 2, Zelda Advanced Warfare 2, Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2, Black Ops 3, Black Ops 5000. Fuck, man! Can y'all stop with the damn Call of Duty games? I'm sorry. I'm not a Call of Duty hater, but my God. Call of Duty in space? Oh, don't even get me started. We'll save that for the podcast. This game is basically just called Zelda. And you know what? For what it is, I recommend this over Four Swords. Yes, I meant that.
So we've touched on all the different portable Zelda games up until the release of the DS, and those games on forward will be in part 2 of this 2-part special, so check back in for that. But we did miss one game in particular. One game which was actually the very first Zelda portable game made, and it's not what you expected if you didn't already know your Nintendo history. Gunpei Yokoi, the man responsible for all the good and the bad associated with portable gaming history and Nintendo, actually cut his portable teeth with a series of games called the Game & Watch. Smash Brothers fans might be familiar with it, but unless you're at least 30 years old, you've probably never even seen one. Well, by today's standards, it's easy to see why, but back in the 80s, this was the coolest thing ever. It actually spawned a lot of copycats, mostly made by Tiger Electronics, but the Nintendo ones were much better in comparison. The idea came from when Yokoi in 1977 was riding on an electric train and saw a businessman tinkering with an LCD calculator. He realized the potential that portable video gaming would have, and it became his pet project. Throughout the 1980s, he worked on this technology, specifically with the Game & Watch series, but it also led to the development of the original Game Boy. The very last Game & Watch game released before the Game Boy, of dozens that were released, was The Legend of Zelda, or, well, Zelda. As simple as a 2-screen game can be, Zelda Game & Watch is still a decent distraction if you're just trying to pass the time for a few minutes. You play as Link, and your goal is to make it through 8 dungeons and kill Gleeok the Dragon 8 times to recover all 8 pieces of the Triforce and save Zelda. Each action screen consists of a single moblin on the far right of the screen, whom you need to slay to progress through the dungeon. As you fight, an army of Stalfos will appear below Link, attempting to stab him from below, and a Wizrobe will occasionally attack from the left, which makes for surprisingly frantic gameplay. Link must attack the Moblin, blocking the Moblin's spear attack while he tries to stab him, all the while dodging the Stalfos attacks from below and blocking the Wizrobe's fireballs from behind. He can only block from behind while attacking and only block from the front by not attacking. So it makes for a difficult and yet fun play, even if it is only for a few minutes or so. Once Link reaches the top, he fights Gleeok the Dragon. Gleeok whips his tail and breathes fire. Link must dodge the fire and strike the dragon while avoiding his tail as well. There are 3 power-ups Link can find in each stage. The Water of Life, which acts as an extra life if Link's energy runs out, the Tomahawk, which allows Link to damage the Gleeok easier, and the map, which shows Link where all the power-ups and the boss are. It's very simple but fun. It also functions as a full watch with an alarm as well, which today sounds simple and primitive, but back then it was convenient to have a watch with you at all times, and some people don't like wristwatches or pocket watches, so this was a nice alternative. Honestly, this is decent fun. If it wasn't so old and rare, and if I didn't have a smartphone in my pocket and didn't want to look like a total hipster, I'd actually consider taking this with me somewhere sometime. It's really cool. Now, believe it or not, this was only released in North America. It was actually never released in Japan. Unfortunately, because of the timing, it didn't have a lot of sales, so the actual Game & Watch is quite rare. If you want to play this game, the easiest way to do so is in the Game Boy Advance game, Game & Watch Gallery 4. The Zelda minigame is the most difficult to unlock, requiring the player to have beaten all other games and to have earned all 160 stars. Even though the visuals were changed due to limitations of the Game Boy Advance hardware, it's probably the best you're going to get if you can actually find the original Game & Watch. Still, it's a pretty cool note from Zelda history.
So all in all, this was a pretty innovative thing for its time. And for how simple it is, and for how primitive by today's standards it is, this holds up really well, again, for what it is. And it's unfortunate that it didn't sell very well, and it's kind of rare because this is a really cool thing. Believe it or not, I actually enjoy playing it. If I didn't look like a total hipster taking it with me on the road, I would play this on the go. I honestly would. So, we're not done with Zelda handhelds. There's still a lot left. One of them, we're going to go ahead and dedicate an entire episode to. But the other ones, we'll save that for part 2. In Zelda On The Go Part 2, we're going to talk about The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, and a couple interesting DS games you may or may not know about. I like to call it the Tingle Trilogy. Yes, I own these games. I'm not proud of it. I have a problem. I need help. Honestly, no, you know what? I'm not even gonna kid. They're not bad. For what they are, they're not as bad as you might think. So we'll talk about the Tingle Trilogy. And then also The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes and Hyrule Warriors Legends, the newest and latest in the Zelda handheld line. Till then, I'm JSR, reminding you to always hold reset down when you turn the power off, as you might lose your save data. Take care, folks.